What happened to Will Smith in that restaurant changed forever the way we see the Hollywood star. He never imagined that a simple dinner with his mother would turn into the most tense moment of his life. Keep watching to discover the reaction that left everyone in shock, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more surprising stories like this. The sound of silverware against fine porcelain and the murmur of elegant conversations filled the atmosphere of Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Soft lights illuminated smiling faces at tables occupied by celebrities, magnates, and politicians enjoying the award-winning French cuisine of Chef Eric Ripert. It was an ordinary Thursday night for most of those present. But for Will Smith, it was about to become a night he would never forget. Will had planned this dinner meticulously. His mother, Caroline Bright, was turning 85, and he wanted to give her an unforgettable experience. Caroline had always been his safe harbor, his foundation, the woman who taught him never to give up, even when all signs pointed to failure. She was the reason for his success, his resilience, his ability to reinvent himself after troubled moments in his career. The path to that moment hadn't been easy for either of them. Will vividly remembered the days when his mother would return exhausted from her 2 jobs, with worn-out shoes and a tired expression, but always with a warm smile reserved for her children. He remembered the nights when he heard her crying silently in her room after the divorce, and how, the next morning, she would present herself at the breakfast table with renewed determination, as if nothing had happened. That silent strength had shaped the man he had become. "This place is wonderful, Will," Caroline commented, her eyes shining as she observed the luxurious surroundings. Dressed in an elegant navy blue ensemble that Will had bought especially for the occasion, she looked radiant. "You didn't need to do all this," Will smiled, reaching across the table to hold his mother's hand. "You deserve this and much more, Mom. Without you, I would be nothing." Despite having reserved a discreet table at the back of the restaurant, it was impossible for Will Smith to go unnoticed. Some curious glances and smartphones pointed in their direction were part of the package of being one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Will was used to it. Caroline, not so much, but she smiled politely at the occasional admirers who timidly approached for autographs. There was something particularly special about this birthday that Will hadn't revealed to his mother. Hidden in the inner pocket of his jacket was a small velvet box containing a diamond brooch, an exact replica of the one that had belonged to Caroline's grandmother and which she had had to sell to pay for Will's school tuition when he was a teenager. It had taken years and a thorough search through old family photos to recreate the piece with precision, and Will could hardly wait to see his mother's face when he gave her this restored piece of family history. The dinner was going perfectly. They reminisced about stories from the past, laughed about embarrassing moments from Will's adolescence, and talked about the grandchildren. Caroline was in the middle of a story about how little Jaden, as a child, had tried to make pancakes by himself and ended up covering the entire kitchen with flour, when a burly man in an expensive suit approached their table. "Will Smith," the man said, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of nearby tables. "What a coincidence to find you here." Something in the man's tone made Will straighten in his chair. He didn't recognize him, but there was something in his eyes, a gleam of malice, perhaps, that instantly put him on alert. "Good evening," Will responded politely, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm having a private dinner with my mother. Could we talk another time?" The man completely ignored the request. Instead, his eyes turned to Caroline. "So this is the famous Mrs. Bright, the woman who raised the Prince of Bel-Air." He made a dramatic pause. "Or should I say, the woman who allowed her son to be a failure in school to pursue silly dreams of becoming a rapper?" Caroline's smile froze. Will felt the blood boil in his veins. But before he could respond, the man continued. "You know, my wife worked at the same school as you, Mrs. Bright. She told me how you ignored the teacher's warnings about your problematic son. How you were arrogant, thinking your son was special when everyone knew he wouldn't amount to anything." The entire restaurant seemed to have gone silent. All eyes were on the scene unfolding. Caroline lowered her gaze to her lap, her hands now trembling slightly. In that instant, a whirlwind of memories flooded Will's mind. All the times his mother had fervently defended him against skeptical school principals, impatient teachers, and pessimistic neighbors who didn't see his potential. Caroline Bright never doubted him, not even when his first rap demo was rejected by 7 consecutive record labels, or when his first audition for a television role ended in humiliation. They simply don't recognize greatness when they see it, she would say, embracing him with that unshakable certainty that only truly dedicated mothers possess. Will felt something break inside him. In all his years in the spotlight, he had learned to deal with criticism, with hatred, with lies about his person. But seeing his mother, his sweet, strong, and dignified mother, being publicly humiliated was something for which he was not prepared. "Sir," Will began, his voice dangerously calm, "I'm going to ask politely one more time. Please leave us in peace." The man let out a disdainful laugh. "Or what? You'll slap me like you did at the Oscars? Your mother must be so proud of having raised a man who solves everything with violence." At that moment, several phones were already recording. The maitre d' was approaching quickly, sensing the commotion. Caroline tried to stand up, clearly wishing to escape the situation. But her fragile legs wobbled, and she almost fell, supporting herself on the table. It was enough for Will. In a fluid movement, he stood up, his chair scraping noisily against the elegant floor. Everyone expected an explosion, a confrontation, perhaps even a repetition of the infamous Oscar episode. Smartphones were raised even higher, ready to capture another viral moment. But what happened next surprised everyone. Will calmly walked around the table, completely ignoring the aggressor. Gently, he helped his mother to stand, wrapping her protectively with one arm. Then, to the general astonishment, he knelt in front of her, in the middle of the crowded restaurant. "Mom," he said, his voice now loud enough for everyone to hear, but his eyes fixed only on hers. "Do you remember what you told me when I failed math in 7th grade?" Caroline, surprised by the unexpected question, nodded slightly. "You said, 'William, in this world, people will try to knock you down 1,000 times. It's not how many times you fall that matters. It's how many times you get up and move forward.'" Will paused, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "And then you spent the entire night helping me with equations, even after having worked all day." The restaurant remained in absolute silence. The man who had caused all the confusion seemed disconcerted, not having expected this reaction. "You worked at 2 schools simultaneously to support our family after Dad left. You never complained, never showed weakness, even when I know you were exhausted. You taught me that dignity is not something others can take from you. It's something you maintain, regardless of how people treat you." Tears began to stream down Caroline's face. Will gently wiped them away with his thumb. "So, at this moment, I want everyone in this restaurant to know who Caroline Bright is," Will continued, raising his voice slightly. "She is not just my mother. She is an educator who changed the lives of hundreds of children in Philadelphia. A woman who raised 3 children alone while earning her master's degree in education at night. A person who never, in her entire life, spoke ill of anyone or treated any person with less than the utmost respect." Will then turned for the first time to the man who had insulted his mother. The aggressor now seemed diminished, uncomfortable under the disapproving gazes of the other diners. "Sir, I don't know what motivated you to approach my mother this way, but I want you to know that we forgive you. Whatever pain is causing you to want to hurt others, I sincerely hope you find peace." With these words, Will stood up, still holding his mother firmly. The maitre d', who had arrived at the scene, discreetly motioned to Will, indicating a private exit at the back. As they walked away, something extraordinary happened. The entire restaurant stood up in a silent ovation, just the sound of chairs being pushed back and people standing as a sign of respect. The man, now completely isolated and embarrassed, quickly left the premises through the main entrance, pursued by disapproving looks. In the days that followed, videos of the incident went viral on social media, but not for the reasons many would expect. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a celebrity losing control. It was something much rarer and more precious. A moment of genuine humanity, respect, and filial love. Commentators from around the world discussed how Will Smith had transformed a potentially explosive situation into a powerful lesson about dignity. Psychologists analyzed how his response had completely disarmed the aggressor without resorting to confrontation. Memes and hashtags celebrating mothers spontaneously emerged. Among the thousands of comments on social media, one stood out from a 92-year-old retired teacher from Philadelphia, who wrote, "I worked with Caroline Bright for 15 years. That man couldn't be more wrong. Caroline was the first to arrive and the last to leave school. She believed in every child, especially those everyone else had given up on. Her son simply reflects the extraordinary character she always demonstrated." The testimony, accompanied by an old photo of the school staff, was shared millions of times and inspired a national campaign to value educators. 1 week after the incident, Will launched an initiative called Respect Forward, an educational program designed to teach young people about respect, empathy, and nonviolent conflict resolution. The initial funding of $20 million came from the actor's own pocket. Caroline Bright was invited to interview programs, where she spoke eloquently about education, resilience, and the importance of teaching children to respond to hatred with love. The humiliation that the stranger had tried to inflict had transformed into a platform for her to share her wisdom with millions. "My son protected me that night," she said in an emotional interview with Oprah. "But what few realize is that he didn't just protect me from the man who tried to humiliate me. He protected me from feeling shame, from doubting my worth. By celebrating my life in front of strangers, he reminded me of who I am." When asked about how she had raised a son capable of such composure, Caroline simply smiled. "You know, when Will was little, he had a strong temper. One day, after he fought at school, I sat him down and said, 'The greatest strength a man can have is not in his muscles. It's in the ability to choose his response when the world tries to provoke you.' I think he finally understood." As for the man who initiated the whole situation, his identity was never publicly revealed. However, 3 months after the incident, Will received a letter. It was from him. The letter contained a sincere apology and the revelation that he was going through a difficult period after losing his job and facing a complicated divorce. Will not only accepted the apologies but discreetly offered help for him to get psychological counseling. Will's gesture of compassion toward his aggressor remained a secret for almost a year, until the man himself, now recovered and in a much better life situation, decided to share his story on a mental health podcast. Without revealing his name or showing his face, he described how Will Smith's forgiveness had been a turning point in his life. "I expected hatred in return for my hatred," he confessed. "Instead, I received compassion, and that forced me to look at my own bitterness in a way that no therapy had managed before." In his next film, Will portrayed a father struggling to protect his family's dignity amid extremely challenging circumstances. The performance was universally acclaimed as the best of his career, earning him his second Oscar. During his acceptance speech, he simply said, "This award is dedicated to my mother, Caroline Bright, who taught me that true strength lies in elevating others, never in diminishing them." What began as an attempt at public humiliation transformed into one of the most defining moments of Will Smith's career and personal life. More importantly, it became a reminder for millions of people around the world about the transformative power of respect, dignity, and unconditional love. Caroline Bright, the woman who was once the target of public insults, now lectured at universities about the power of resilience. In each presentation, she always concluded with the same words: "When someone tries to knock you down, you have 2 options. Stay on the ground or transform yourself into an example. Thanks to my son, I learned that sometimes the greatest revenge against hatred is simply to live your life with even more love." In an increasingly polarized world, where confrontations and scandals dominate news cycles, the moment when Will Smith defended his mother remains as a rare example of how true strength often manifests not in explosions of anger, but in silent acts of dignity and respect. And what about that interrupted birthday dinner? Will rescheduled it a week later, not at an exclusive restaurant, but in the small kitchen of the house where he grew up. There, surrounded only by family, he cooked for his mother the same macaroni and cheese that she used to prepare for him as a child. in the days when they didn't have much money. As Caroline later told a curious reporter, "That was the best birthday dinner I've ever had, because no matter how famous or rich my son becomes, I know he will never forget where he came from and the values that truly matter." And so, what began as a moment of public humiliation transformed into one of the most powerful lessons about dignity that Hollywood and the world has ever witnessed.